Afternoon, y'all. I wasn't planning on making a video this afternoon, but in light of what just happened, I felt like it was really important to basically do a commentary on a previous commentary I did. In case you have been under a rock for the last few hours, Charlie Kirk was just shot at an event in Utah, something he does regularly. He hosts forums for people to ask questions and have discussions. And if you saw the video of the shooting, he was talking about mass shootings and gang violence when he was shot. So it's just absolutely astounding. Yeah, I don't know. This is one of those moments where, like, we'll look back, and this could be the start of, I think, civil war in America, because but between the rhetoric and all of the issues surrounding Irina Zaritska's murder and just escalation over the past few months, I think things have boiled over. I think things have boiled over, and we've reached a point where tolerance is no longer tenable. And this is something I've talked about and written before as well. We have irreconcilable political differences, so we can't come to an agreement on things through the existing institutions we have. So, obviously people don't trust the political process. You don't trust the media, and you don't trust the judicial system, as we're seeing with Irina Zaritska's murder. I've already seen clips on X of MSNBC and CNN. Talking about how they don't know the motivation of the shooter. Like, this isn't a politically motivated assassination attempt of someone who has a prominent following on the right. Yeah, he has conservative values. He's no Nick Fuentes, though, right? He's just a guy, Christian man, father, has opinions that resonate with a lot of people, likes to challenge college students, and enjoys that debate setting. And this, frankly, I think brings an end to the First Amendment, to be totally honest. How can any of us be able to have conversations and be able to do so in a free society, right? You had a guy go to Nick Fuentes' house, and I'm not defending Nick Fuentes by any means, but you had a guy go to his house with a gun. He'd already killed a family, okay? And he went to Nick Fuentes' house prepared to shoot him. You had people who came and harassed him. Obviously the assassination attempt on Trump's life in 2024 last year, Butler, Pennsylvania. And now you have this. So it sends a pretty clear message. If you disagree, you're gonna get shot. And this is one-sided, right? Like, this isn't. You don't see white people hunting down black people on public transportation systems. You don't see conservatives shooting their political opponents at rallies. Like, when has a conservative or anyone who even a moderate, for example, when has anyone gone to an AOC or Bernie Sanders political rally and opened fire? That's never going to happen. People on the right don't behave like that. So I think we've reached the point where this is no longer tenable. But it's not even just that. It's like we don't even exist in the same media environment anymore. I was messaging a friend of mine, a liberal friend of mine, before I hopped on, and she asked me how I was doing. I was like, a little uneasy with all the news, and her response was, "What news?" And then I said Charlie Kirk was shot, and the whole Irina Zaritska murder, and she's like, "Oh yeah, I don't really watch the news anymore. It's too overwhelming." Not even like so apathetic to it, and not even having a response, because everything rational, sane, normal people have been paying attention to and following. We've all been like cast as these crazy lunatics. Everyone buckets us into like these crazy MAGA lunatics, and we all know it's not true. But it's become so entrenched. Basically, the left has weeded out any sort of dissent, because all of us who did dissent have now moved closer to the right, or at least to sanity. And so what remains is a hyper controlled group of people who believe everything that their media ecosystem tells them without a fault. And the language they've been using and the rhetoric they've been using over and over again, Nazis and you're evil, you're out to get us, murderers, like the language they're using, fascism, right? It justifies the extermination of your political opposition. So that's why that language is important. During the Rwanda genocide, for example, the media in Rwanda continually referred to the Tutsis as cockroaches, right? And so that language over time it was dehumanizing in nature. And so over time it made it a permissible environment to hack your neighbor to death simply because they were a Tutsi. And so this is really important. And I've been saying violence is escalating. I think we're on the brink of a second civil war. And I think we're there. I think we're there. You know, if Charlie Kirk dies, definitely, absolutely. You know, and if he doesn't, still, you know, the First Amendment is gone now. There's no way. There's no way. People like me, people like him, people like Candace Owens, people like, you know, Benny Johnson, Ben Shapiro. There's no way. Matt Walsh. You know, anyone who's on the right now is a target. But not even just anyone on the right and the prominent people. It's just anyone who has an opinion. Like I obviously, you know, I'm not that big. I don't have that many followers, right? Um, but anything someone says on the internet these days, you know, you could be assassinated for it, and that's where we exist right now. So I wanted to play this because this is the first video I published back in May. I started publishing on videos on YouTube because I've been writing on Substack for a while, and I recognized one, the Substack audience is a little bit older, but two, Gen Z doesn't really read anymore. So as someone who writes and wants to share thoughts with the world, it's kind of hard to do that when your audience is aging out of being an audience, and the people who are aging into becoming your audience aren't interacting with written content. So that's one of the reasons why I started writing. I started doing commentary on YouTube. It's just a little bit easier for me to, you know, spontaneously come up with thoughts and react to different pieces of content, and add, you know, my own thoughts and takes on them. And so far, it seems like you guys like it. Like I published this when I had like 20 people, 20 subscribers on this account, and now I'm up over 4,500. So I think that's a good indication that, you know, you like what I have to say. But because this was published a few months ago, you probably didn't see it. So I wanted to re-record over it, just to, you know, in light of the events today, give an update. Like where are we? Because I think this essay was really important, and it got some traction on X, but I think a lot of people glossed over it, and a lot of people are looking at this like, no, you know, our neighbors are never going to kill us. You know, people aren't going to devolve into this. But we've seen a progression. We've seen a progression in violence over time, and I think we need to call a spade at this point. So let's dive in.
So this essay was published about a month ago, and it got a lot of attention. Folks like Tim Pool covered it, and it went viral on X. And I think it's worth diving a little bit deeper into what this essay talks about and why we should take it seriously. I think we're at a point right now in the United States, a lot of us can feel it. Like there's just a lot of tension. But I think we're at a point where we have irreconcilable differences, and what I mean by that is how we define things, how we approach each other. We don't have like a common baseline foundation. So just to give you an example, you know, a common baseline, a foundation would be we all agree not to kill each other, right? Like basic, thou shalt not kill. Whether you come from a religious background or a civil background, I think we would all agree not to kill each other. Well, we don't necessarily hold that to be true anymore. As we'll get into this essay in a moment, there are some people within the country who think it is justifiable to kill. As we're seeing with the Carmelo Anthony case here out of Texas, like killing is now subjective based.
So, for those of you who weren't following the Carmelo Anthony case, and I find this important to call out because I just did a video on Irina Zarutska, and the Austin Metcalf Wikipedia page had been cleansed to not include his name. So, Carmelo Anthony is a 17-year-old black man, you know, black student who was at a track meet with a bunch of other high school students in Frisco, Texas, I think back in April. And he was sitting under the wrong tent. There was a rain delay. Something happened. He was sitting under the wrong tent. Austin Metcalf was one of the captains of another team, another school. Carmelo Anthony was sitting in their tent. He asked him to move. Carmelo Anthony like made a comment like, you know, talk to me again, see what I do, and some whatever. Just I don't even know like what the exchange was, but the next thing you knew, Carmelo Anthony pulled out a knife. Why he had a knife at a track meet is still beyond all of us. But he pulled out a knife. He stabbed Austin Metcalf, who was a 17-year-old white student. And killed him. He killed him right there at that track meet. And this gained a lot of attention because the Anthony family was playing the race card. They had gotten the National Action Network or something. Some pro-black organization had sponsored the defense and public relations campaign for Carmelo Anthony. Someone started a Give Send Go campaign for him, and he raised over $500,000. That's why Shiloh Hendricks made money off of her issue because of Carmelo Anthony, and that became one of what has since become many race based issues. I think, the Austin Metcalf and Carmelo Anthony story kind of went through the media cycle. People started forgetting about it, and then Irina Zaritska happened. And unlike the Carmelo Anthony case, where they didn't publicly release the footage, we've all seen the footage of Irina Zaritska at this point, and I think we're all on the same page with what happened. He killed her in cold blood. Um, the audio footage was also released, and the guy said, I got that white girl, right? So we all know what this is about. So, yeah, I think this is really the things that I thought were starting to boil over have actually done so.
Based on your interpretation of personal defense. And so we don't have like a shared set of values and foundational principles that we can all agree upon. And so we now have a very fragmented society. And typically in the past, when you have that level of fragmentation, you're able to reconcile your differences through institutions. So that could be social institutions, everyone go to church, or everyone's part of the public school system. um, maybe it's the judicial system. We recognize the rule of law and the veracity of courts. The political system, we vote in new political leaders when we disagree with them. So there were all these institutions that used to exist. And I mean, they still do exist, don't get me wrong, but they don't have the power that they used to. So we used to have all of these institutions that could be a neutral arbiter when we disagree on things within society and between people, and that no longer exists.
So I want to correct myself here. I said they don't have the power that they once did, and I think they have power. As they don't have the trust. They don't have the trust and the confidence, and or I mean, the media is a perfect example. I mean, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to pull up the media. I mean, Charlie Kirk had actually gone after Van Jones on CNN, like not even yesterday, because Van Jones was like, "Oh, we don't know why he killed her. This wasn't a racially motivated attack." When the surveillance video from the train car in Charlotte said, "I got that white girl." Like he knew he may be schizophrenic. He may have had his issues, but he knew what he was doing. He knew what he was doing. He went after a white girl. Um, and so it's not even it's because we've been gaslit so many times, and you have all these second chance judges in the criminal justice system who are like, oh, this is good. Well, no, it's not. And then there's no accountability. So there's no trust because there's no accountability. So the institutions that we would need to kind of met out our differences, they no longer have the trust of the public, so they can no longer do the job that they are designed to do.
And so when you have that context in mind, it frames why this is important to think about. Before I dive in, I apologize. This is my first recording, and I thought it would be cool to come to a local coffee shop and record outside. And there's folks doing what do you call it, landscape work, and I wasn't expecting that. So apologies in advance if there is some background noise. I'm not good at editing, so I'll figure out how to edit as we go. Anyways, I want to dive into this. So first, before we kind of dive into the text of the essay, let's talk about the author. So the author's name is Nicholas Decker. He published this on Substack. He goes to George Mason University in Northern Virginia. He studied economics in undergrad, and so I pulled up his LinkedIn profile. He's not active on LinkedIn, but based on the information he does have, he graduated in 2013, and then, or sorry, not 2013, 2023. And then when you go on to his X profile, he's a PhD student, and he has all of the typical individual identity markers you would expect of a current college student. So I bring that up because he doesn't really seem to have any real world experience. It seems like he went straight from high school to undergrad, graduated in 2023. It's 2025, so if he's a PhD student, he probably just went straight on to PhD. So his world and his worldview is shaped both by a lack of real world experience, but also he was in college during COVID, and that was a fundamental period of time for a lot of people, especially young people. And so his worldview was shaped by being in lockdown. And if he's from Northern Virginia, he's kind of sequestered in a liberal left leaning bubble. So he really has quite a myopic view of the world, and we'll dive into that as we go into this. Okay, so he got a lot of media attention for this, and he had to write a little prefix to try to give it some sort of context. One thing I want to call out that he does here is he says that what he writes in this essay, again, the title is When Must We Kill Them? So it's about killing people. That it should only be employed in defense of our constitution of democracy. And that gets back to what I was saying in the beginning, because we don't have a foundational set of values anymore. Um, the Constitution itself is now very subjective. Like, how I interpret the Constitution is probably going to be different than you interpret the Constitution.
So a great example of this is the Kilmar Abrego Garcia case. So you've heard a lot of folks talk about the 14th Amendment and how that should be applied in due process of law. And that's a great example. You and I can pick up the U.S. Constitution, read the 14th Amendment, and come to very different conclusions about how to treat foreign nationals who are living in our country, legally or otherwise. And so you have folks on the right who say Kilmar Abrego Garcia got more than enough due process, and you got folks on the left who wanted to bring him home. And he's so far there's been evidence that he's been in front of a judge for domestic violence. He's got MS-13 gang tattoos, so he's affiliated with a gang. And there's court testimony that affirms that as well. It's not just looking at the tattoos. There's court testimony too that someone, the father of his wife's children, had made that he didn't feel safe with his kids being in a home with Kilmar Abrego Garcia because he was a gang member. He feared for his safety in El Salvador. You wouldn't fear for your safety if you weren't a gang member. And then there was video footage of him during a traffic stop, trafficking people. So there's documentation, right? But even with presented with facts and information, if you don't want to call them facts, if you just want to say information, data points, depending on how you interpret the Constitution, you're going to look at those data points through a particular lens. And so this is what this is why this is important, because he says, is it to be employed only in defense of our Constitution of our democracy? So killing is justified in defense of the Constitution of our democracy. But if we don't live in the same America, if we have different interpretations of what the Constitution means, what it's supposed to entail, and what our democracy is, based on the media environment we're living in, you could take action on something thinking that you're justified, as just happened with Charlie Kirk, when the rest of us are looking on like, oh my God, this is not good.
Depending on your political worldview. And we're seeing this right now with the Kilmar Abregu
Yep, there
case
you go.
with the guy from El Salvador, MS-13, gang member, and the interpretation of the 14th Amendment. We can't agree on how the 14th Amendment should be interpreted. Do non-citizens and people who come to the country illegally have the same rights to due process as citizens who are born here? And the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments were issued after the Civil War. And so the context of their creation was with regards to slaves who, before the Civil War, were treated as property. And after the Civil War, they became citizens. And so that was like a process of implied citizenship there. And so that's
Exactly.
where those amendments come from. But now folks are trying to interpret those in the context of illegal residents who are here without permission, without authority. Do they get rights to our court system? And so that raises a question, like, it is to be employed only in defense of our Constitution. Well, depending on how you interpret the Constitution, there could be different levels of violence that can be employed for that effort. So let's go through this. So he begins by declaring that the present administration is engaged in barbarism, and he qualifies this by saying it has arbitrarily imprisoned its opponents, revoked the visas of thousands of students, imposed taxes upon us without our consent, and seeks to destroy the institutions which oppose it. So within this, again, depending on your perspective, like, this goes both ways. So this kid is obviously, this young man is clearly on the left. And so he sees the present administration as being oppressive. But the same was true for folks on the right, or even folks in the center of the last administration. So the last administration arbitrarily imprisoned opponents by way of the January 6th protesters. It didn't necessarily revoke thousands of student visas, and I'm unclear if thousands is the right word here. I know there's been several student visa revocations. I don't know if it's thousands though. The last administration like inflated the economy, and that's a de facto tax on us.
And now we know this to be even more true because the last revision to the job market was 900,000 jobs less than was previously reported. So that's important because the Federal Reserve has been making decisions based on incorrect labor market data. And because they believed that the labor market was strong, they held interest rates where they were. And so that's been, in fact, impacting you and I and how much we pay. So we've paid essentially a tax, we've paid a penalty on incorrect data that was generated during the last administration to create the illusion of a strong economy that didn't really exist.
And then by allowing people to come into the country illegally, it destroyed our borders. And that's a pretty significant part of being a free and sovereign country. So, depending on your perspective, like this is true on both sides. But for this particular essay, this gentleman argues that the current administration, so the Trump administration, is engaged in barbaric activity. He argues that if these actions become normal, the government could arrest anyone and deport them to prison in a foreign land without hope of redress for no reason, and that there is no guard or protection against it. So he's made a slippery slope argument of the current administration is barbaric by the aforementioned qualifiers, therefore it could lead to imprisonment, which I don't know. And again, it depends on your interpretation of kind of what's happening now. If you think illegal, and I think this is in the context of illegal migrants, if you think illegal migrants are citizens and are entitled to the same rights as the rest of us, then okay, maybe I could see this being true, but I personally don't think that they are. I haven't seen an American citizen, an actual American citizen, yet being arrested or deported for no reason whatsoever. So he argues because of this threat, because our liberty could be taken away, that we should fight and that protest is only good to some extent, but we have to actually decide to push back against barbaric, oppressive regimes. And so he goes on to say if the present administration chooses this course and the questions of the day can be settled not with legislation but with blood and iron, we must decide when we must kill them. We must accept war rather than see it perish. And so here, I do want to say too, this dude writes like he's Thomas Paine. Like his language is very verbose and it's not colloquial in the way like you and I would talk. He's like trying to establish himself as an elitist and someone who's like has the moral authority to talk about something, and because he's in academia or at least studying to be part of academia, like he's part of this modern American intelligentsia that up until Doge, to be totally honest with you, has been completely empowered. Let's call it the expert class, not intelligentsia. The expert class has been empowered up until very recently to kind of tell the rest of us how to live our lives. And I say this as someone who was like trying to be a part of that class. I started my career in Washington, D.C., worked at a think tank for a while and with defense contractors. And so there definitely is a moral and intellectual supremacy in DC that doesn't exist elsewhere in the country. In the same way that there's a financial supremacy in New York, there's a cultural supremacy in Hollywood, and there's a technological supremacy in Silicon Valley. Like, folks in DC think they're mightier than thou, and this individual definitely panders to that. So you can see that through the way he writes. But he's clearly laid out here that we must kill them and that war is a better option. And so who is he talking about by then? He is talking about the present administration, so Donald Trump, but not just the present administration, because he goes on to say the rot of the present administration runs deeper than one man. The problem is not one man, but a whole class of people. If one head is cut off, another will take its place. So he's talking about the administration, so everyone who works for Donald Trump. So you can think J.D. Vance, Attorney General Pam Bondi, Kash Patel, all the way down to your low rank and file junior employees. So anyone who works in the administration for Donald Trump is complicit. But again, interpretation is very subjective here. So it could also include people who voted for Trump. If this argument is to be maintained, that the problem is not one man, but a whole class of people, and that the head of it must be cut off unless another one takes his place. This is, I hate to use the word genocidal because it's being used so flagrantly on the left right now. But when he says one, if one head is cut off, another would take its place. Like, this is the same language that is used whenever you're trying to like erase a group of people, and in this case, the erasure is along political lines. So
And it's not just political lines. I mean, I think politics and race have become intertwined because race has become an identity within politics. It's moving in that direction too. So we're seeing feminists are pushing for the erasure of men. We're seeing, migrants pushing for the erasure of American citizens. We're seeing African Americans and people of color pushing for the erasure of white people. You saw that with Irina Zaritska's murder. And then, of course, you're seeing leftists and political opponents pushing for the erasure of conservatives or anyone who challenges their opinion. So it's not even just like erasure along political lines. Like this quite literally, it is genocidal. This is the language that has been stoked within the media environment of the left has incited this kind of language. And I hate to invoke Nazi Germany because that's what they've been doing. But I took a really interesting class in college called Nazi Germany and the Holocaust, and one of the things I learned in that class that I hadn't really been aware of, because you can only learn so much in high school world history class, was that before the Holocaust and the final solution was implemented, there was a period of social death. So what do I mean by that? So over time, um, laws had been passed to stigmatize and erase the Jews from public life. So you couldn't, own businesses. You had to wear the yellow star. You're removed from certain professions. The Nuremberg laws, right? So over time, there was a stigmatization of Jewishness in public life. So imagine you were, say 10, 11, 12 years old when the Nuremberg laws passed, in the 1930s. Okay, well, less than a decade later, you're a teenager and you're fighting for the Third Reich. Okay, so you have people who were kids when this was happening, right? They went through the Hitler Youth and all that kind of stuff. And then by the time it came for the start of the war, um, they no longer saw Jews as people. And so this is what's been happening. Now that I look back, and I'm checking myself here because I was part of this problem. I think this has been happening since 2015. Since Trump descended from that escalator in Trump Tower and announced his candidacy. I think for the better part of the last decade plus, um, there has been a process of political erasure in this country to demonize um, the right, and I think this has extended to different identity groups because the left is so inculcated with identity politics. And I think this is why so many people have rebuked the left and moved away from it, because we all see what's happening, right? Like we're looking at it, we're like, okay. And your issue could have been different. Mine, I saw stuff during COVID that didn't really jive with me. And then obviously like feminism, seeing where that was going, how I was told to surrender my womanhood to trans men and accept them as equal to me was just an abomination. That's a red line I was not willing to cross. Um, the issue that brought you to where you are insanity is going to be different than mine. Um, there might be some overlap, but we all came at this from a different angle, and we've all drawn the same conclusion that we're being gaslit, we're being lied to, and there's a progression of violent rhetoric on the left, and this is why this is important, because you're seeing it now, a decade plus of this start to really play out, and you're seeing people actually commit heinous acts of violence, taking people's lives. And we can't agree on the sanctity of life anymore. And I'm not even talking about the abortion. I'm just talking about your and my right to sit here and, babble on YouTube. Like, we don't have a right to do this anymore. And I hope that point hits home, because it's fundamental to what it means to be an American.
he says that because of this risk, violence is a solution, and that violence has to be part of a coordinated strategy, and that protests are important not as a way of changing what's happening, but as a way to coordinate a group. And so what that means is everything we've been seeing up until now is basically a dress rehearsal for something bigger that could come. So when you look at the Tesla takedown protests, or if you watch Liberty Hangout, Caitlin Bennett's really great. She covers protests in Florida. So if you go to those protests, and you see the different groups of people who come out and are protesting the administration, protesting Doge, protesting Elon Musk, whatever, this individual is arguing that those are basically attempts to show how well the left can coordinate. And you're also seeing this on college campuses, Columbia, and recently University of Washington with regard to the pro-Palestine protests. So this is basically a dress rehearsal to see if how well the anti-Trump side can organize one another and get together to eventually down the road coordinate into violence. And so he doesn't give a catalyst for when this is permissible, but he gives some examples. So if elections are canceled, if there's fraud in the electoral process, if there's suppression of speech of the opponents, jailing political adversaries, ignoring the will of Congress, spurn the orders of the court, these are all justifiable reasons for revolution. And again, this is why the subjective interpretation of all of this is really important, because depending on what side you sit on, like this is happening. So, everyone jokes about or dismisses Trump for the 2020 elections, right? But what we're seeing now, or what we've seen since then, is a flood of millions of illegal migrants who have come into the country. They have been given social security numbers, a lot of them, and they've been given benefits, food, shelter, housing, all that kind of stuff. And the expectation is then they would get expedited citizenship and then vote for Democrats in upcoming elections. So they're essentially using illegal migration as a way to pad their voter rolls. And a lot of these people we've seen haven't been confined to large cities. A lot of them are coming to large cities, but once they're there, they're being redistributed throughout the country. So it's not just like we're seeing a massive, migrants within Texas or New York or whatever. We're seeing, migrants in, small town Ohio. And so some of this is intentional, right? Like here in Texas, Governor Abbott shipped migrants up to sanctuary cities because he was tired of dealing with them. But some of it is also politically deliberate as a way to, pad voter rolls. He talks about suppressing speech of opponents. Well, cancel culture is doing this, and we're seeing this. It's rampant on the left, right? The CEO of NPR and the leader of PBS were recently in front of Congress, and um, Trump signed an executive order to get rid of their funding. There's good reason for that. NPR isn't receives taxpayer dollars and isn't objective. Uri Berliner last year wrote an editorial for the Free Press where he called out NPR for not having a single conservative or registered Republican on its editorial staff. And we can see this because when the Hunter Biden laptop story came out, for example, a story that could have changed the outcome of the 2020 election had it been appropriately reported on, the NPR called it fake news. They said, no, this isn't real. There's nothing here. There's not a story here, so we're not going to cover it. Turns out it was real. And so right there, it's suppressing. It's not necessarily saying, okay, you can't say this. So it's not like that type of overt suppression. It's what I call de facto censorship. It's by omitting certain viewpoints and perspectives, you're censoring what information the public gets. And so if this kid, I'm sorry, I keep calling him a kid. He's like 20.
This is exactly what happened with Irina Zuritsky. This is why so many people are upset. She was murdered on August 22nd. Today is September 10th. The video footage has been released over the past couple days on X, so it's early September, and we're only now learning about the brutal attack. And it's not that the media deliberately suppressed it. It's that they just didn't even talk about it, right? And so this is what I'm talking about, the de facto censorship. Like they're controlling the media narrative by choosing what to publish and what not to, and then obviously demonizing folks on the right for talking about certain things. So if you've been following the Zarina Zuritsky murder, it's only people on the right who are talking about it. So we're all crazy people because we're offended that an innocent white girl should be brutally murdered for doing nothing wrong. She was coming home from a pizza shift, and she did nothing wrong, and she was murdered for it. And so yeah, like just the omission of the fact that that those stories aren't making the press. That means those parts of the conversation aren't happening. And so, you know, the left is shaping a narrative that isn't actually aligned with the facts on the ground. And so obviously people on the right are very angry because there's things that are happening and we're like, well, what's going on here? And then folks on the left have been trained and conditioned to demonize anyone who questions the established narrative.
20 something, that this guy like lives in Northern Virginia, is in academia, and only consumes the New York Times and NPR. Like, those are the only stories he is going to see. And if he has been consuming that since he was a teenager up until now, like, his entire worldview is shaped by that because he thinks Fox News is evil, and anyone else who, Joe Rogan, and anyone who calls, questions, anything that the legacy media is saying, anyone who questions that is inherently wrong. And so, for depending on what side you're sitting on, like, yeah, of course, like, suppression is already happening, but this individual is arguing, like, okay, if Trump does something, maybe by defunding NPR. So rational people like you and I are looking at NPR and we're like, hey, they didn't cover the Hunter Biden story. Like, of course they should have their licenses revoked and their funding revoked. But from this dude's perspective, because Trump enacted a legislation, or an executive order, not legislation, executive order to remove their funding, this is suppressing free speech in his opinion, and um, eliminating the voice of the opposition. Therefore, this is justifiable revolution. And so this is why it's important to take what he's saying seriously, because people genuinely believe this. They genuinely believe Trump is abusing his authority in the White House, in order to suppress the opposition and rig it and basically become a dictator. And I do want to call it, he highlights here, if it ignores the will of Congress. So Congress hasn't done its job in almost a century. Like, everyone's complaining about tariffs right now. Like, I think the last time Congress actually exerted its tariff authority was in the 30s, right? So, like, Congress can do oversight. Like, there's no reason to have Doge. If Congress was doing its job, we wouldn't need Doge. Um, but Congress hasn't been doing its job. It's been, over time, it's delegated more and more of its responsibilities to the executive branch. And that's because Congress, like, it's just a giant country club of elites who just want to parade around and look like they're doing something, have all the benefits of public office. They get insider trading, as we've seen with Nancy Pelosi's portfolio, right? So there's a financial gain there. Like, they're not actually in it to legislate. They're in it for their own self-interest. And so, like, what does it mean if it ignores the will of Congress? Like, if the Trump administration ignores the will of Congress, like, whose will? Like, Ilhan Omar's will? AOC's will? Like, what are we talking about here? Like, they have abdicated so much of their responsibility and authority. Like, I don't know that any rational person can actually take Congress seriously. And we're seeing all of this, like, all these people who have come forward now because they're trying to set themselves up for the 2028 election. Obviously, 2026 midterms are coming up. Like, there's all this politicking and grandstanding right now. And so, what does the will of Congress mean within this context? I think that's a really important question to ask. And so, he continues on, like, we shouldn't be sheep to slaughter. We can't cooperate. He talks about how the state and local governments can litigate the actions of the present administration. And if local and state police or municipal police refuse to share information, or they can be deputized to do the work of the evil ones, whatever that means. But this whole section here, I think, is really important because we're starting to see this play out now. So this guy has already established, if the Trump administration kind of oversteps its bounds and begins imprisoning political opponents and begins suppressing speech, then it's reason for revolution. And so this has become a self-fulfilling prophecy because we're seeing state and local and municipal governments being insubordinate. I think it was in New Jersey over like a week or two ago. They went to an ICE holding facility to protest, and I want to say, I think it was Newark, and the mayor was arrested. And so, again, depending on what media source you're looking at, the worldview you're looking at, like, that's literally the example here of the Trump administration suppressing a narrative that they believe to be true and invalidating the actions of local leaders that they believe to be in the right. And so the more this happens, the more it can transpire into an actual catalyst for civil war. And so this guy kind of lays it out how he sees it and how things could go. And I wouldn't ignore this. So everyone thinks like, okay, young people, they don't know what they're talking about. So this guy, you've probably heard about him in history class, hopefully. This is Gavrilo Princip. He was a Bosnian Serbian nationalist student who assassinated Archduke Franz Ferdinand, and that's what kicked off World War One. So when he died, where is it? Up here. So he was 23 years old, I think. Yep, 23 years old when he died. So he's pretty much the same age as this dude who wrote this essay, probably not far off. And so, if you don't know the story of what happened here, there was this whole opposition group, and they were planning to assassinate the Archduke and his wife as they were going through a parade. Something happened, and they weren't able to. And they kind of abandoned the mission. And Gavrilo Princip walked away. Didn't think much of it, and then opportunity presented itself. The Archduke's driver took the wrong road. He ended up right in front of him. Gavrilo Princip took the shot, killed both him and his wife Sophia, and World War One happened. And then because World War One happened, World War Two happened a couple decades later. So these events are all connected. Like this 23-year-old, probably one of the most important individuals in history. And so I don't want you to write off like Gen Zers and young people as being incapable of doing something like this, because history tells us that they have before. And had we, the shooter and the Butler PA rally, I mean, same age, like a 20 something, a kid who would have been written off, like a kid who like had no tactical training, didn't know how to use a gun. Like there's no reason why he should have tried to assassinate the president. And yeah, I know there's like theories about who got prompted him to do that. I'm not going to dive into that, but the point being is like the people who you least expect to do something are going to be the ones who do it. And so I'll close by drawing your attention to this. So this is an essay I published online on Substack. This is a review of Victor Davis Hanson's book, The End of Everything. If you haven't read the book, just a quick summary. He looks into why several civilizations were annihilated. So he looks at Thebes, he looks at Carthage, the end of Byzantium in Constantinople, the Aztecs, and he looks at why civilizations that had existed for centuries and were powerful and respected, like how they became annihilated so quickly. And one of the conclusions he comes to in the book is that hubris is blinding. Folks who are on the precipice of destruction really can't fathom that it could happen to them. And this has really happened with Carthage. The Carthage.
Okay, before this continues, I think this is important with regards to guns, because a lot of folks on the right are like, well, the left, the right has all the guns. The left, they're a bunch of effeminate people who don't know how to use guns. Like, there's no concern there. And I think that's a completely wrong read of it, and we're seeing that now, right? The guy who shot Charlie Kirk was an older gentleman. From what I've seen, obviously reporting on that is still very fresh, but an older gentleman, probably in his 60s. And the shot where he hit him, I mean, it looked like it came from a bit of a distance. I think someone said 100 yards, and it was a pretty good shot. So, I wouldn't necessarily just assume that everyone on the left doesn't know how to use weapons. I think that's been the assumption up until now. And I don't, yeah, I mean, the number of guns on the right might be higher, but we've seen time and time again, the left is willing to do all sorts of things to commit acts of violence. Obviously, guns are one way, knives, Molotov cocktails, they're willing to do whatever they need to do to get their message across.
Carthaginians had placated the Romans. They fought the first, second Punic Wars. Over time, Carthage's might had diminished. They were kind of bending at the knee to do whatever Rome wanted. But a centuries long, essentially feud led to their ultimate destruction. Like even when they bent the knee, like Rome could not forgive what they had done to Rome in centuries prior, and they led to their obliteration. The same with the Aztecs, right? Like they see these white Spaniards come in, they think like nothing can be will happen to them, and sure enough, like Cortez or non Cortez absolutely obliterated the Aztecs. And so just because you don't think your enemy can do something doesn't mean they actually can't. And if you think, I see this coming from the right all the time, like, oh, the right is more well armed, they have the
Yep,
most guns,
exactly.
they would know how to suppress a revolution. That could absolutely be true. I don't dispute that. Um, but that isn't to say like there's going to be an upper hand here. Like you don't really know where the financing is coming from for a potential second American Civil War.
Yeah.
There's a lot of special interests at play. Everyone talks about George Soros with judges and the media. Like I don't think we really truly grasp the network of interests that are underpinning what's happening in our society right now. So who knows, the CIA, you go through history, like how many like small groups of ragtag like political opponents has the CIA funded and trained, right? Like I don't know like what Antifa is doing right now, but like who's training them? Maybe someone is, who knows. But just don't take your opponents to don't underestimate your opponents, take them seriously. You never know what could happen, and I would take this threat seriously. Like, this is someone who exists on the left who is writing an essay with the intent to reach an audience in the same way that Thomas Paine wrote Common Sense, a couple hundred years ago. Like, he's trying to have the same effect today and provide a rallying cry for a lot of people to get around. And I don't think we should just, write him off as some crazy college student. Like, I think it's time to really consider that we have irreconcilable differences in our country. Our institutions that we used to rely on to mediate our differences are no longer viable. And I think the escalation towards violence that we saw in the assassination attempt, that we've seen in the Tesla acts of domestic terrorism with Teslas, we're seeing it as slow progression towards violence that I think could get out of hand really quickly. And I think there are interests who would like to see it get out of hand because they profit in times of conflict and war. So I would pay attention to this. Don't write it off. And I would love to know if you read this essay, what you think. I'll leave it in the description below. But I would love to know your thoughts on it, your perspective. What do you agree with? What do you disagree with? And, if we're on the precipice of civil war, what do we do? How do we start preparing for this? And if there is something we can do to de-escalate, what would you like to see happen?
Okay, so that was that video for you. Again, I recorded that a couple months ago. I think I published it back in April. That is based on an essay that was published by someone on the left, and it had gained traction because it kind of gone viral on X. But yeah, I mean, I'd echo that question. It seems like we've kind of hit a fork in the road, and I don't know that either direction you go in is a good direction. On the one hand, nothing gets done, and the violence continues to escalate and escalate, and more people die, or we break out into full-fledged civil war. And what does that look like? And I confess, I haven't been paying enough attention to the war in Ukraine. But what I do know about the war in Ukraine is that it has fundamentally changed the doctrine of warfare itself. So whatever civil war happens in the United States, if one does break out, it won't be like the 1860s. We're talking about asymmetric warfare. We're talking about cyber attacks, the destruction of the financial system, drones, mass surveillance, which the infrastructure for that is already in place. A breakdown of obviously law and order, which also results in a breakdown of society itself. And why this is so alarming to me, and it is like I talk about this from the political side, but compounding this is a massive transformation within our economy. So it doesn't even matter at this point um, whether you agree or disagree with the politics of it. Like if it's true, if the predictions are true, that the vast majority of people, especially white collar workers who tend to skew more liberal, lose their jobs in the next 18 to 24 months because of automation and tech related job displacement. They're gonna look for a scapegoat, right? So I feels like we're damned if we do, damned if we don't. Like one way or another, something is going to have to give. And the way the media landscape has pushed things, um, it definitely echoes a lot of the same language that was used in previous acts of violence, not just the Holocaust. I said before Rwanda and the genocide there, but the idea of dehumanizing your opposition, making them out to be less than you, segregating them socially, social death, killing them socially, making them insignificant and unworthy of human dignity from the social sphere to justify their physical demise later on. And I think that's where we're heading. Yeah, I mean, again, I'd like to know your thoughts on this. Do you think it's possible that we can de-escalate this at this point, or the combination of Irina Zuritska's murder and then obviously the shooting of Charlie Kirk today? Have we reached a bridge? Have we crossed a bridge too far? Have we crossed the line? Have we gone past the Rubicon, if we will? Is there no turning back from here? Is it, conflict moving forward? I'd be curious to know what you think about this. Yeah, so that's what I got for you. I pray for the Kirk family and hope for the best of them because they're. I mean, he's outspoken. Yeah, he has a following, but he's no different than you and I. He has opinions. He's a father. He's got kids. He's got a wife. He does his thing. You do your thing. I do my thing, and that's what makes America so great, right? It's because we get to do all of our individual things and we get to do it freely. And if he can't do his thing freely, you and I can't do our thing freely either. So, I think this is a pretty big deal. So I really hope for the best, and I hope I'm wrong. I hope all this is wrong, and I'm just crazy. But I'm afraid I might not be. So thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next one.